Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Forward Thinking Podcast. It's Christy here from CS2. And today we have our guest, Asia Corbett. This is a follow-up episode to when she was first on the podcast talking about data governance. And it was so good that we got to the end and we just wanted to keep going, wanted to hear more, and especially around how to operationalize this, so specifically like what tools and how Asia's done it in the past. And as a reminder, Asia is the head of revenue and community operations at RevGenius, but also has a background working at fast-growing startups in revenue operations. So she brings a wealth of knowledge. So welcome back, Asia.
Hi, glad to be back. Nice to see you again. Happy to be here.
Definitely. Okay, so and Asia's actually, blessed us with her time, even though she's going through a crazy few weeks of buying a new house and
oh my gosh,
and all that. So extra thank you for spending your time with us this week.
Of course, I have to give back to the community, right? And I just said the other day, if there is one industry that could use revenue operations, it is the mortgage industry, because
oh my gosh, yeah.
There's a lot of inefficiencies there. I will just say that.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, that's something that I think about too. Like, we're going through that process right now, as I told Asia, and it's almost like we even have to like with our process, even start like 2 loan processes, because if this one doesn't work out, then we'll use this. And
that's what we're doing too. That's what we're doing also.
Yeah, so it is a bit crazy. But anyway, we'll get back to the subject. So just as a reminder for everyone, when we talk about data, and it's something that all operations people struggle with, but it's as we move everything into like this digital world, like data and the data governance has a huge impact on how we market and sell to our prospects, but also the overall experience. But from your perspective, like what's the importance? Like, why should operations people like care and really make the case to start building out a framework?
Yeah, so data governance and how I think about it and as it pertains to operations is really maintaining the integrity and being a good steward of the data in your organization, and especially around go-to-market data. Because I think data governance frameworks have existed for like historically for IT departments and engineers, right? But now in this day and age, revenue operations, marketing operations, sales operations, and CS operations have to manage all of these systems that feed all of this data everywhere to support their teams, enable their teams. So having a good framework to manage the database health and the integrity of the data and have standardization helps you scale.
Definitely. Yeah. One of the things too that has come up recently is also there's like needing that artifact or having some type of like way to define and having like clear definitions of your data. So how important is that as well? And how like what does that do when like these different teams are, working with a set of data to really clearly define those?
Yeah, it's really important for people to be on the same page about definitions of your data, because I'll give a very simple example, and one that I've encountered before in my career, is that 2 different teams, a finance team and a marketing team, are using different definitions of an SQO, a sales qualified opportunity. And finance reports that number to the board, and it has to be tied to the board plan. If the 2 teams are not on the same page and they're using different definitions of this same metric, and they're coming to me and saying, Asia, this report is wrong. Why is this report wrong? I'm like, okay, not only does it impact what you're telling the board, which could have serious implications for funding, but then it takes your operations professional time to go and like look at the reports, and you're like, oh my gosh, something's broken. What's broken in the system? And then you get on a call with your go-to-market leaders and you're like, hey, you guys know that you're using the same report with different definitions, and then there's more time. So not only does it have, financial implications, because if you're reporting something different to the board and the marketing is like, I'm hitting my plan, and finance is like, well, no, you're not. Um, there's that, and then there's the internal, like, okay, I thought we were speaking the same language, thought we were reporting on the same thing. Now it's taking like 2 hours worth of time to say, okay, here is the definition. Here's why it should be this definition. Um, so, as a revenue operations person or an operations person, if you can provide your teams with the structure, they're not going to read the stuff all the time.
Yeah.
I know this, but if you have something to point back to say, hey, look, here's actually our Google Sheet with our data dictionary, and this SQO equals this, and
Right.
it lives in the CRM, and it's populated by integrations or whatever. You can point back to that, and so you can start to foster this sense of like, okay, we have this is important,
Right.
and you repeat that
Yeah.
across all your teams.
Definitely. I think it's super important, like, there's like the reporting aspect, because like if, like you said, if the data's wrong, then that just causes like confusion across the team, and that doesn't create alignment. And so I do think like definitions in itself, or having this data catalog, is doing something that we all know we need, which is alignment across all the operations teams or anyone touching the data. But then the second thing is too, it also can then turn into uh teams being more self-serving for themselves. So like,
Yeah,
if they did want to go build a report, then they
right.
knew what field to use. They don't have to go to someone to like double check that. You can just look there. So I think having those definitions also like saves the team time, or saves like all these like random requests that you don't really need, when
Mm-hmm.
there's clear definitions already laid out.
That's a great point, Chrissy, and that's something. Enablement is something I believe is a critical part of operations,
Hmm.
enabling and empowering your teams. And if you
Hmm.
have this framework and you have the documentation, the marketing team or the sales team doesn't need to come to you with every single reporting request. They can say, I can do this on my own, and I can save them some time and save me some time.
Yeah,
Great
definitely.
point.
Yeah. And I think, as operations people, like, it's not like our job, we have like less work to do, or like we're
Right.
just looking for more work. So um
Right. Right. No,
anytime we
exactly.
can minimize those like small requests that come through. And it's something that like we talk about with documentation, but data governance, or having that like a canonical set of data with those clear definitions, also just saves you time from like having to clear up confusion, like
Yep.
you said. Or
Hmm.
you said, oh, I would have to spend like 2 hours just trying to fix these things, or having to talk to someone and jump on a call. And those are all things that take you away from like being strategic for your organization and
Yeah.
working on the things like actually on your roadmap. So I think that uh all of these things, like when you think about prioritizing a project that maybe doesn't have like a clear relation to maybe the customer experience, if they're saving you time to work on important things that touches the customer experience, and this does impact the customer experience. But I think for a lot of
Yeah.
marketing teams, they're like, why should I focus here, or why should I do this? They're, if it's saving you time in the long run, it's worth putting the effort into it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that people don't realize that we are fast and we're good at our jobs, right? We understand the data and we live in it and we live in these processes, but it still takes time to put
Right.
together a report. Like I can put together a report and it might be fast, but it's still not fast. So having that um, structure for the team so that they can do self-serve, that's one of the benefits. And then one of the other benefits to the operations teams are, as we build new processes and as we build new systems, automations, and as we're building new reports and thinking about that, we have a frame of reference as well. So I'll give you
Hmm.
another example. I was doing setting up some sequences and some triggers between outreach and G2 and Salesforce. And I don't know, for those of you out there who map custom fields in outreach, it's not like the greatest UI.
No,
And
no.
so the labels, the labels don't show up in the interface. You're like, okay, what is custom property 26? I don't know.
Right.
That's in the data dictionary. I almost overwrote some mappings, but
Mm,
because I had the data dictionary, I was like, wait, let me just check that really quickly because I think I remember, but it's documented somewhere. So let me just check. It's a mapping G2 to outreach, so that maps back to Salesforce. So anyway, it saved me as an operations person as I'm, building out some new automation. Right? That's another benefit of having this.
yeah, you're even helping yourself like save time. So if you
Hmm.
think about like the benefits of that, like yeah, it can have long lasting. I think any type of now we're realizing when you put any type of, you know, governance, even whether it be data, but also like a certain process, part of it is the documentation of showing like this is where we are today. And
Hmm.
then there's like the request process. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about your experience. I want to kind of dive in, and you can pull from your. I know at your last role when we spoke to you, you did a lot of work there on like aligning the revenue team and building out a framework, which you talked about. Or maybe
Hmm.
even talk through like some things you're doing now at RevGenius, but would love to hear like what the process was like before creating like that framework, or did it happen like naturally? And then what were some of the steps that you took, and like what did that look like as far as being able to like maintain and document your current data strategy, but also when you need to put on additions, so like if you're creating new fields or any new processes that impact data.
Yeah. So the catalyst, I guess, for me really putting my foot down and saying this is something important that we've got to do now is we had a like a nurture sequence, and it was for trials, people who signed up for a trial, and a lot of people were getting enrolled in the same sequence multiple times. And so I would get forwarded the emails. What happened here? What happened there? Why did this person get this email twice? The same email, the same like welcome to your free trial email. Like
Wow.
very,
Yeah.
very stark. Like what's going on internally
But
that
think about
I
how many people listening are like, "Oh, I've been in your shoes, Asia. I know
I
what that's
know,
like."
I know, and it's like we feel stuck. I'm like okay, because on the one hand, I don't want to get the forwards from my boss like, hey, what's going on? Because
Yeah.
that makes me sweat. I'm like, what did I do? And then
Right.
it's not a good experience for your buyer,
Yeah.
right? The free trial, they're like, oh, I already signed up for a free trial. Why am I getting another email? This company doesn't have their proverbial, together. So
Yeah.
it's twofold. And so then I was thinking, okay, how can I? And I'm like looking at where our free trials are coming from, like like are there duplicates? Starting to go down this audit, and then as I'm thinking about how can we avoid something like this in the future, it's like, well, we don't have any documentation. We have no process
Mm.
documentation. And now here is why it's important so that we understand where the entry points for free trials are. Like, where are the forms for that? Does the form live in HubSpot or does it live in the platform? And if it lives in the platform, how are we syncing that data back? Like, I started thinking about all of those things and I was like, okay, we need to have some sort of structure or framework around defining all of the data points that are important to us because you have a lot. You don't need to put every single data point into that data dictionary, but what you do need are the important ones, like a free trial source, like which channel, marketing channel that they come through. So I proposed this and I was like, look, I will do this. I will make the time to do this because it's important. Here's how it's going to impact the buyers, they are going to have a bad experience and they are not going to want to convert their free trial into a paid subscription. They're going to go to a competitor. They're going to be like, I
I
got the
think
free
that's like
email
one
price.
really, yeah, I think that's one really good thing. And one thing that I try and tell some marketing ops people is like, if you can make the case that how this could impact the customer experience or potentially make it better, that's always going to get some executive level buy-in because that's like
Mm-hmm.
number one, right? Like it's even built into like people's like tenants is like the customer first, right? And the customer experience, like you said, now is such a competitive advantage because like the moment someone hits your website or starts engaging with you, there's already been like so
Mm-hmm.
much time of their own research and
Yep.
talking to people and looking at their other competitors that like you need to make sure that that experience is like impeccable, especially now that like outbound is just so tough, you know?
Yes.
Once
Yes.
someone does come to you, you need to make sure like that person converts.
Yes, exactly. I've been seeing that trend. Outbound is it's getting rough out there. And so, we're relying on the marketing operations in this case be really solid. Um, and so I was like, hey, here's the potential
Mm-hmm.
dollar impact. You can do napkin math, right? It doesn't have to be
Mm-hmm.
just if you're in this situation and you're in your organization, you're like, well, how do I get this prioritized? Say, hey, um, there are 200 people that got double emailed. What was the
Mm-hmm.
value of that? Like and they could have churned, and that could have been at the very minimum, whatever minimum tier pricing of your product, like I don't know, say $500,000. I'm just throwing numbers out there. That's potential $500,000 lost. Like we don't want to have that, do we? So let's
Yeah,
prioritize this project for the operations team because it's important and it has a revenue impact, even though you don't see it.
right. Totally. I think that's super important to like with anything like make the case like all and also think about okay what is like the beneficial outcome, so start from there. Like that's what we also talk about like with our product mops is like okay tie an outcome to your feature. So if your outcome
Hmm.
is really just like we want to improve our like free trial experience or we want to make sure that like the conversion rate on that free trial person to a customer is, a certain amount. Like you could even slot this like working on your data governance as like something to work on because that's going to impact it. So you can most of the time with anything like that is important if it will likely be tied to some of the outcomes you're already tracking or the business objectives because like data is just so important. Data rules everything in marketing,
Yeah, it does.
it's
Exactly, it does. And organizations want to be more data driven. You see these campaigns everywhere. You want to do data driven decisions and become a data driven org. Well, how do you do that? You have to have some governance around your data because otherwise, you're your data is going to be either one, crap, or two, you won't have it.
mm-hmm. Yeah. So what about the process of like actually putting together like a program around this and like especially around maintaining or maybe cleaning up the data um and document it to also like with the request process. Like do you have any, and it can be even, pretty rudimentary, but do you have any like kind of examples of ways to manage that?
Yeah. So at first, it's gonna start with you doing like your overall audit across your data points that are important to your teams, um, your automations that you have running. So, and then something that I got from Manny Ortega at Redis Labs. He's the director of sales ops, or the senior director of sales ops, and he has this um, document called minimum viable record. So it's like an MVP, but for records. And it's this idea that in order to create your like most commonly created objects, like I don't know, a deal or an opportunity, a contact, an account, a lead, there's a minimum amount of information that is necessary before you create that record. And it sounds like restrictive and maybe a little bureaucratic, but it's important because you get these records and then you get missing information and gaps in information. Those fields can be filled out through enriching tools automatically, or if end users are creating things like accounts, then they have to have this minimum set of fields that they have to fill out in order to create the account. Otherwise, they can't create it. And that
Mm.
helps. So having those three components, I think, are key to the data governance framework in terms of in like in the programming sense. And
Yeah.
then setting up a cadence to regularly audit. This may be boring stuff for some people, even operations people, to like audit your data dictionary, audit your system catalog, your system automation catalog, and audit like, are people filling out the records like they are supposed to? But you have to do that regularly to see if your strategy is working, if your program is effective or not. So setting up a cadence to review, I like quarterly is a good one. It doesn't feel like it's too frequent, but also it's not like once a year. I think quarterly is good because there are so many in your typical B2B SaaS company. There's like, I don't know, 10 or 20 or 30 tools in your stack. You do have to monitor that, but you don't want to spend all your time doing that. So
Right.
the idea is that you put your framework in place, you start your data governance program. That should get you through a quarter. So then you say, all
Mm-hmm.
right, what adjustments do I need to make at the end of this quarter? And then like the request process, or at least how I view it, it does have an impact on like the data, because what happens is, how many of us have been asked for a new field
Right.
in the marketing automation platform or the CRM or somewhere? And it's like, okay, do we actually need that field? What about the fields that we have? How can we repurpose those? Or maybe the answer is in there and people aren't using it, so that to also tell you, be prescriptive. How can we help our teams more because we have this information? What do we need to do additionally around enablement for them? Right? We
Mm-hmm.
don't need to give them the entire data dictionary. Maybe it's they've got a couple of one pagers with some screenshots, and it's like, here are the fields to use to track these things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not
Yeah,
overwhelming for the end user or for your go-to-market teams.
totally. That's super important. We talk about that a lot too, is just thinking about your internal users. And I think that like you do this is important too, like as you deliver this project, there's like products that your
Mm-hmm.
end users, like your internal users, are going to be using, and some of that is that like documentation. It doesn't need to be, there's two types of documentation. There's like
Yep.
technical, and that's something that
Mm-hmm.
your ops teams are going to like
Mm-hmm.
be comfortable using and
Yep.
referencing. But then for a non-technical person, maybe someone on the sales side, or even a marketer like in demand gen or something like that,
Yeah.
they might have a different way that they need to view that data. So it's super important, because a lot of times we just go, why isn't anyone using this? Or
Right.
why doesn't
Yeah.
anyone get this? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, don't just like think outward, like think inward. Like, is
Yes.
it something that you're doing, like with delivering that
Exactly.
data, that might be doing that?
Yeah. When we are living this, it's sometimes we forget that, the person on the other side using the systems or reading the reports don't see what we see. Right?
Right.
So we have to be cognizant of that. I've been guilty of that too. I'm like, ah, man, this is so easy. Like, this looks so good. Why aren't they using this dashboard? And then I realize, like, they don't think the same way that I do necessarily. So you gotta take a couple of screenshots and break down each component and say, this is what the component tells you. This lead source, this new leads by source tells you this. If you see this lead source, it means this. Right here are the definitions of where they come from. So it can feel like that's not important, but it is. Like, it can feel like ops teams, oh, documentation's not important. I've been told by my leadership teams that that shouldn't be prioritized. The documentation's not important, but time and time again, things come up where it's like, if we had a one pager for this, people, you just guide them to that, right? People
Yeah.
aren't using the dashboard. Well, how many times can I verbally tell them? I can drop
Yeah.
them a Slack though. here's whatever, wherever your knowledge base is. It could be a Word doc, a Google Doc, but here's the one pager for the dashboard. Here is that, so go ahead and use it, versus you having to get on a call with them every time and explain, okay, here's what this means, here's what this means, here's what this means. It will also eliminate your, hopefully over time, this impact won't be immediate, but your bug requests, because people will say, hey,
Yeah.
this is broken, but it's not actually broken. It's just that this is how this was designed, and um, yeah, you have to like put this value in for you to be able to move your stage.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I think that yeah, just breaking it down. And like you said, like yeah, there might be times where people will, and even we do this, like sometimes, like even with our customers, like they're limited on hours, like they want to skip parts of the process, and like every
Mm-hmm.
time we do, the parts
Mm-hmm.
that do get skipped is like part of the documentation,
Yeah.
or taking our QA and testing to a smaller group. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like, okay, having, be strong and confident, knowing, okay, actually no, we need to make the time for this, or like, okay, we're not going to make the time for that, but this is what's going to happen later, and it's
Yes.
going to come, it's going to
It
catch up to you.
always comes back.
Yeah.
Always. No matter how big or small your organization. Like, we're working on some projects now internally, and I wasn't able to be a part of some new systems we rolled out to track some things. I was like, we need to test this. We need to test this. And we didn't test it before rolling it out. And now I cannot track data that I need that's very important that feeds into a forecast. So I'm having
Hmm.
to click through 3 different systems, go in, search for the people, cross check, and I'm like, okay, that's not even living where I'm doing my reporting in the CRM. So had we tested, we would have known, okay, maybe we need to choose a different system, or maybe we need to make sure that this integration between these 2 systems is solid. And if it can't be done, we have to think about something else, because tracking something that has a revenue impact is very important.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
now I'm trying to rethink how to configure this when we have a product that's already live. So
Wow.
always, UAT always is very important. Documentation's always is really important, and it always comes back. Sometimes sooner than other times. Like, this
Yeah.
was pretty immediate. Like, come on. Love my
Yeah.
team. I love them. And I just remind them, I'm like, hey, this is why you hired me, right? And they're like, oh
Yeah.
yes, that's right.
Yeah,
So
definitely. That happens. It's always the ops person that gets pulled in late, and you're like, why
yeah.
did I get pulled in
Mhm.
late to this?
Yeah, I could have helped. I could have helped. I was
But creating these processes like you're talking about, where if you're building a framework and you're kind of taking the time, and it's a cross-functional thing, and you do a lot of the selling on it, it actually just be like you get pulled in earlier because people know, okay, this is part of the
yeah.
process. In order for me to do this, I need to
Yeah.
talk to this person, and that doesn't happen overnight, like what
Yep.
we talked about, but it is, it can create that process where it doesn't happen too late, or
Mhm.
you do let people know, because they know, okay, Asia is responsible for this. If I wanted to do this, I need to request this from her, so let me
Yeah.
start talking to her earlier.
Yeah, the request process too. Like, when people hear, I feel like when people hear process, they get scared. They're like, "Oh no, this is going to slow me down. I'm not going to be able to do my
Right.
job." It is the other way around, but um like, culture change takes a while, like you're saying. Change
Yeah.
management, that exists for a reason, and sometimes we as operations people have to be a little bit more patient. Like, I am guilty of this. I have to be more patient of the end user, or the people that I'm serving, right? Because I know change is hard. Even for me, change is hard. And so
Hmm.
just coming to that with a little bit of empathy, like, they don't, it's hard for them to adjust to a new process, or like they think this is going to slow them down. A request form is going to slow them down. It's not, though, because you go back and forth between the email chain and you're like, what do you actually need? And I don't have the requirements. And well, what actually is this prioritized against other objectives, right? You can get that all in one shot in a form. but you have to like groom people a little bit to get
Yes.
there. Um,
But it's like within like any like if you think about it as a user,
hmm
like there needs to be different points of like a process or escalation process before
Yeah.
maybe even requires a
Yeah.
human. So like if you're putting through a form, you have
hmm
documentation there. You could
hmm
even use questions to filter out like some of the questions that you could draft could even weed out some requests because it can be like, are you requesting this? And if they choose a certain one, then you can say, okay, go look at this documentation,
Yeah, exactly.
So similar
Exactly.
to like a drift bot or something where you
Right.
can like use questions to weed out the right prospects. You can do that with some of your process request forms too.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So a couple companies ago, I worked on a business operations team. So the business operations team supported the whole organization. But we had a heavy like sales ops focus because we had a large sales team and the team turned over and had new people. And so they had a lot of questions. And so we were like, okay, how can we, when someone asks a question and it's like a certain type of question, how can we prompt them with an article? Same like a support bot, right? Like an
Yeah.
internal support bot. And we went through that exercise and the current team I'm on now is small, but we want to grow and did ultimately doesn't matter the size of your organization. If you can
No.
save yourself time by doing this and also help your end users and the people internally, then gotta do it.
If anything, I always say doing this stuff early, the better, because like once
Yes.
you wait until you're big enough, it's just so
Yes.
much harder to do.
So much.
There's so much time, there's so much tech debt, like there's so
Yeah.
much like processes like but if you like get into this process of like going and reviewing, setting the data
Yeah.
standards, like it just makes like growing into it so much easier. So I agree with you. Like, doesn't
Absolutely.
matter if you're small or if you're a big company, if you're a growing company. And also, if you're a small team, it's likely you're a one person team.
Yeah.
So having this process too is just easier because, like we said, it can be preventing, saving you time, deflecting questions, deflecting things
hmm
that are distracting you, which will then help you as a one person team.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Exactly. You gotta empower yourself too.
yeah. All right. So the final thing I wanted to chat through was just around like tools. Like do you have any, and it doesn't even need to be like SaaS tools or anything, but like are there any like tools for your data governance or catalog or management of data or even um like documentation that you like really like to use that have been useful for you or
Yeah,
even ones that
so
you haven't used but you feel like could be useful.
oh my gosh, yes. So I love my tools. I think we do in operations. We have our favorites, right? And I would say like to get started too, don't be afraid to use the G Suite. Like my data
Right.
dictionary was built in a Google Sheet, and that's
Yes.
fine. That suffices. The system automation catalog in a Google Sheet and the MVP, the minimum viable record. So that you can put in a Google Doc. I had it in there at one point. Um, the tool that I think is the hands down the coolest tool for documentation is called Guru. Don't know if you're
Yeah.
familiar with it.
We just launched Guru not too long
Oh,
ago and
amazing.
I'm glad you mentioned it because it is great for documentation, but also it can be hooked up to Slack. So if you're searching for something, it can
Yep.
search Guru. And so that's a great way to do some of that like deflection or case deflection, question
Yes.
deflection.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. So the user interface is really nice.
Yeah.
You can create, and they call them cards, but you create your documentation really easily. And the Chrome extension. The Chrome extension is probably the thing that I like geeked out over the most because if you're not in Slack, like if you're in your browser and say you're in sales, because sales teams have a lot of questions. And that's not a bad thing. Um, Pop open your extension, right, and search for what you need. You don't
Yeah.
ever have to go in to Guru to search for anything.
Yep.
You can search for whatever, like if there's a dispute over a account that's in someone else's territory, and they're like, well, actually, uh, this is a named account, and you go to Guru, say, hey, pull up the card, check it out. Here is the 1, 2, 3 steps of named account rules of engagement, and then close it when you're done. It never, like, I don't know. So to me, that's really enabling your teams. Like, look
As
how
100%.
easy it is to get this information. So easy. It's not a Google Doc. You don't have to search through Google Drive, all of that stuff. It's just there. So I really like that tool. We're not using it currently, but um, I have before, and that's a very good one for documentation. And because it's so easy to use, will help with adoption.
Yeah, it's
Um,
in their workflow because you're thinking about, okay, what's something that can
yes,
be within their workflow? And that's
exactly.
always going to have way better adoption than say like, hey, go and go log
Yes,
into this. And they're like, wait, no, I'm in Salesforce or I'm in LinkedIn. I need,
right.
so that Google Chrome extension is great because they don't have to leave Salesforce. They don't have to leave LinkedIn. They
Exactly.
can have those up and then just pull up the
Yep.
Guru, card. So
Yep, exactly that. And then there's one tool that I would have loved to use. Right now we're not using Salesforce, so we can't use it, but it's called Sonar. Sonar. And it actually, the idea, because I haven't used it, but I would love to, the idea is that it tracks all of your business process automation in Salesforce. So if you're going to make a change somewhere, it will tell you where the impact is going to happen. And that is done manually. Right? Or I have historically
yeah.
done this manually. Like, oh, I look at my system automation catalog and I'm like, okay, in HubSpot, there's these workflows, in Salesforce, there's these process builders and these flows, and Outreach, here's these triggers and which ones are connected to which ones if I make a change. But with that tool, it sounds like you can do it in the tool and it will automatically tell you. That will save operations teams a lot of time, a lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
definitely like figuring out like where something's used within like processes um is super tricky. I was talking about it to a client the other day and that um like you can use like the where's this used button on like a field, but even then you miss out
mm,
on certain places as
mm-hmm,
well, or it's not very clear. So
yeah,
I think that's a great tool to check out. Actually, we've been meaning to have Brad Smith, who's the CEO of Sonar, on this
yeah.
podcast. I think hope we're trying to get it rescheduled, but
Fingers
so
crossed.
yeah, excited to have him on to talk about that. But yeah, I agree with you. Like there's a lot when it comes to like the definitions and documentations that you can do. And if you are limited, like start simple, like what Asia said, like start with like a G sheet, do some analysis. There's things like running a field trip and you can see like what percentage of fields are populated in Salesforce. And
Yep.
there's also tools like Field Pro, which you can add on through the App Exchange, and you can see and also add in, definitions to fields, but see where they're referenced and the percent populated as well, right within
Hmm.
Salesforce. So there's a lot of great things that you can maybe be a bit scrappy with to start, and then think about, okay, how do I build like a process or framework? And I think having that tool of like a documentation, if it's more around like not so much maybe you have the way your data is being populated nailed down, but if it's more like documenting it and trying to let the end users know, maybe you focus on a tool for that, like looking at Guru. So I love that. I love those ideas. And we could go on all day.
I know, I know. This is one of my favorite topics. I know it's like the boring, unsexy part of operations, but it is so important. And the more that I can like evangelize this, the better. Because, it's enabling us, our profession, and then it's also enabling and empowering those revenue teams to go bring in revenue. That's what they're
Yeah.
supposed to do. So,
I think that it's getting its day. I think people are
yeah,
realizing that data is sexy because like when there's nothing sexier to a leader if they see an awesome dashboard that they know like all their team is
right,
aligned on and they're
right.
making
Yep.
smart decisions and like it's amazing. And then also when your teams feel like they can be empowered, like, and how
Hmm.
happy they are, like, that's amazing too. So
Yeah.
I do think it's starting to get its moment now that we have more and more people talking about it, but also because everyone's experiencing pain. Like the longer we're
Yeah.
in these jobs and in these companies and it's too late, that's when you realize you need to do something. So
Yeah. Agree.
but yeah, thank you so much, Asia, for joining today. It was amazing. I feel like we're gonna need even more follow up on
Part three.
yeah.
Yeah.
But thanks for fitting us into your day. And then for everyone who wants to connect with Asia, she's very active on LinkedIn. Just search Asia Corbett, Corbett,
Yep.
on LinkedIn. And she works for RevGenius. And if you aren't part of RevGenius, definitely go and join. They have a lot of great content and events and a very active community there. And so encourage you all to check that out. And we'll see you on the next episode of Forward Thinking. Have a good one.
Bye.